why did we choose to do this project, how the project developed, and where we are going from here. So why did we pursue this project? Well, the city has a long-standing devotion to complete streets and vulnerable road users. We have had this citywide interest in pedestrian mobility for a while now and safety that really led to the creation of our Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force a couple years ago. And we get repeated resident input about crosswalks and the need for consistency throughout a variety of different engagement means. So this is really wordy, but this was the directive that came from the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force. And the task force they were residents. So they were a non-industry group of people who were working through this and trying to create some input for the city on where we wanted to take a pedestrian safety plan. So one of their priorities that they came up with in their process was that the city should develop and adopt a context-sensitive design guidelines that provide consistent regulatory and warning messages for motorists and pedestrians. These guidelines should be based on applicable research and reflect current best practices. The city should set up a process to evaluate the understanding and effectiveness of various crosswalk treatments and adjust practices accordingly. Well, that was a pretty big thing to assign us as a task, and it was kind of vague and not really well defined in exactly how we wanted to do it. So when we sat down to address this task assignment, we said, well, okay, we really need to define our problem. We need to determine what we want our desired outcomes to be. And this has to be a public process. We can't do this in a bubble here at City Hall. We really need to engage our community and our stakeholders. And we need to develop these engineering tools and set up a framework that is going to be easily applied by residents who want to understand our process, by engineers who are doing consulting for us, by developers who are coming in and developing and perhaps creating some transportation impacts that they're going to need to look at non-motorized transportation. So as we continue to define the problem a little bit better, we said, okay, well, why are our crosswalks inconsistent? They're inconsistent because regulations have changed and design practice has evolved over time. And, there have been individual variances in traffic engineers over the past 15 years. And there are always resource limitations that we do have to address. Some of the other contributing factors that we really wanted to make the public understand as we were presenting this is that, sometimes there are sight distance issues and you do things a little bit differently if you have a little bit of a sight distance limitation, not ideal circumstances. How are we maintaining things as far as markings and signage and other infrastructure goes? What's the overhead illumination like to really address some of those, those nighttime crash problems, or perceived problems or preventing crashes? And also, just understanding that not all road users really understand what everything means, and how do we kind of develop this culture where everyone understands what they're supposed to be doing at all these crossings. So as far as the outcomes go, we really wanted to develop a consistent, recognizable look and feel for all crosswalks throughout the city. And we wanted to help create that clear, shared understanding of all road users through that consistency of the infrastructure. All of that being said, we knew that, not every situation is cookie cutter, and we're going to have to leave room for variances in design conditions. So our initial public plan was to do the stakeholder engagement, and we wanted to have public sector partners involved. We wanted to work with our local transportation agency. We wanted to bring in the University of Michigan. We wanted to work with the Ann Arbor Public Schools. We wanted to make sure we directly engaged the Ann Arbor Disabilities Commission and various interest and advocacy groups within the city. We planned for 3 public meetings, and we held all 3 of those public meetings. We also planned initially for a community-wide survey, which we've done with some other projects in the past, and we thought this would be a good way to engage folks who are not actually able to make it to any of the public meetings. But ultimately, we did not do that because we found that we couldn't phrase questions for a survey that would really give meaningful input. So then we got into developing the engineering tools, which, being an engineer, this is the fun stuff. We really wanted to review best practices and look at things that were going on across the country to see how that should influence what we were doing in the city. We took a look at the NACTO guidelines. We took a look at some ongoing MDOT research, particularly the gateway treatments, which we'll be hearing about. We were participating in that project, and looking at national research, and we decided that we needed to choose devices that really reflected the community's preferences and met the MUTCD requirements and would be effective. We didn't want to continue to use devices that were perhaps people liked them and thought they were really great, but research had shown that they weren't so great. So an example of that is that we have a lot of locations where we have the overhead Illuminate K sign with Crosswalk and the downlighting. Everybody loves those. They love the downlighting. But what research is telling us is that that downlighting is creating, negative contrast. So we're not getting the best and most effective lighting of pedestrians for motorists to see them. So that's a little bit of an education challenge in the city right now. Continuing to develop those engineering tools, we knew that we needed to create treatments that would be context sensitive. So we needed to look at road classification. We looked at, a category for local collector, minor and major arterials that were 3 lanes or less, and minor and major arterials that were greater than 3 lanes. And we wanted to create treatment categories that would be progressive. So we knew that we wanted to be able to go somewhere if we ended up with a problem in a location. So we developed 3 categories, and those are our standard plus, and our high-risk categories. And we picked treatments, for different control types. So we wanted to have a set of treatments for uncontrolled crossings, a set of treatments for controlled crossings such as stop signs or yields, and for roundabouts. Most of the public interest really focused on those uncontrolled crossings because in their opinion, those are like the ones that we need to be looking at. And that's really valid because those are the areas where we have more opportunity to create a consistent environment and to really highlight the fact that those pedestrians are there and to create safety improvements. When you're at a signalized intersection, there are fewer things that you're able to do to kind of affect that pedestrian space. So the rest of the presentation is really going to focus on those uncontrolled locations. So as we were developing these categories, we really knew that we needed to apply the categories in a way that was going to be easy to understand, particularly for the public, that would be really data-driven and replicable and defensible. So we wanted to find a process that we would be able to give to a consulting engineer and say, here, do this, and know that we would end up with a result that was similar to what our own engineers would come up with. One of the things that we decided to really rely on heavily was the NCHRP report 562, and that is the improving pedestrian crossings at unsignalized intersections. And particularly the spreadsheet that TTI developed as part of that project that includes the worksheets that are in Appendix A. The thing that has been really great about using this tool is that because it is data-driven and it does create consistent results, we're also able to work with the public and show them what variability can do to the design results. How many people are in here are familiar with this tool? Okay. So the spreadsheet is developed. I have the different sections up here. to really be able to input the data for your crossing, you want to be able to look at speed. If you don't have 85th percentile speed, you can look at using the speed limit. But you're inputting your population, you're inputting your peak hour pedestrian volume. The great thing about this is it's a 1 hour analysis. You can do it for any hour of the day. This is a topic that came up repeatedly in our public engagement, and that is that if the peak PED volume occurs at an hour other than the vehicle peak hour, we can analyze that hour too. We can look at both of those. We can look at any hour of the day, and it doesn't have to be, it can be any 60 minutes. So that was something that the public was really responsive to, and they were really happy to see. So one of the things that's in here that I want to address is this step 2. Does the crossing meet minimum pedestrian volumes? Something that we decided as an agency is that we weren't going to focus on this particular requirement. We wanted to be able to look at the system to decide whether or not a crossing made sense here. Because as we know, if you build it, they will come. We wanted to be able to decide outside of this tool whether or not we wanted to put a crossing here. So as far as our process goes, we're starting with the assumption that we have made the decision that we want a crossing here. Now, what do we need to be building at this crossing? So the tool lets you take a look at whether you're meeting a pedestrian warrant for a traffic signal in that hour, what your pedestrian delay is going to look like. And you end up with this graph at the end, which says what type of device should you be putting in here. Now, this particular example that I've been showing is for one of our arterials. It's 5th Avenue in the area of Carytown, if you're familiar with it or not. It is the area where the farmers market is. So on Wednesdays and Saturdays, there are tons and tons and tons and tons of pedestrians out here, more intermittent at other times of day and of the week. So this is PED volumes for farmers market conditions. And what we came up with based on existing conditions is that we need to do an active or enhanced out here. So we have this great graphic that we can show the public. It's easy for them to understand. We can also help them understand what the variations in pedestrian volume and vehicular volume and speeds could have, what kind of impact that could have on our design. If PED volumes increase by 50%, what does that do? If traffic increases by 25%, what does that do? Then we knew we needed to create a process that people could follow. And one of the things that we heard repeatedly from our public was, we want to be able to figure out how you got there. And what we ended up doing was creating this flow chart, which, if you're familiar with like Boulder's guidelines for installing pedestrian facilities, this is a very similar concept to that. A lot of our public was very interested in the Boulder guidelines. And we have the two areas. We have what our controlled decision tree looks like. We have what our uncontrolled decision tree looks like. And we wanted to really make it easy for people to correlate all of the different aspects of this decision process together. So we stuck with the colors that are coming out of this graph in this tool that was developed by TTI. They are coordinated with where we end up in the decision tree, so that we know what type of category we're looking at for our treatments. And then here are our treatments that we have set up for an uncontrolled location. Now, I'll be perfectly honest with you. When we started this, the engineers and the transportation planners at the city sat down together and said, okay, let's think about these different types of facilities and what we would reasonably place on each of these types of facilities. And we actually set this up first. And we said, okay, how would we do this based on our knowledge, based on best practices, left to our druthers? How would we do this? And at the end of it, once we came up with our decision flow, we found that this fit really well with that process. So this was able to remain as we had originally established it. There are some tweaks in here, and there are some changes that have occurred. One of the things that we heard consistently from the public is that they would rather us design up than down. So if it's questionable, they always want us to design up. So we did make some reflections of that in here. One of the things that we stress to everyone is that they're cumulative, and there are options in here. So not everything will go in together. If anybody has questions about this, I can talk about it for a long time later. But where we're going from here is that we're in the process of finalizing our report and getting some graphical updates for our website on this project. And we want to be able to have something so that people who are not involved in the process as we work through it can go to it and get an understanding of, if I'm in this category, what does that really look like? And then we're also working with some other agencies in the county to actually develop design standards. So at this point, we internally had not said, okay, this is what the design details are going to look like for each of these treatments. But at this point in time, we're working on that, particularly as we're working on the Washtenaw Avenue corridor with multiple agencies in this Reimagine Washtenaw project. And we are also working to incorporate those changes into our design standards of the city, as far as like our published standards of this is what you'll be doing. The one thing that has been great so far is that even though all of this has not been finalized, we are currently expecting our transportation impact analysis providers to use this tool. So they're using the TTI tool as they are doing their transportation impact analysis, and they're able to analyze the non-motorized infrastructure around their sites as well as the motorized infrastructure. That's it. That's my contact info.